Hi, I'm Abigail. And if you'd told me 2 weeks ago that a plumber would uncover the one thing my family spent decades hiding from me, well, I might have laughed in your face. But there I was, standing in the hallway of my sister's wedding, wearing a dress I altered myself, watching my name get erased from every toast, every photo, every smile. They made me invisible on purpose. And when that dusty wooden box came up from the basement, it didn't just carry paper. It carried a truth so heavy, it shattered the only family I thought I had. So tell me this. If your father knew the truth all along, but chose silence, would you still call him Dad? I parked my old silver sedan under the hanging branches of Spanish moss, just beyond the wrought iron gate of the Ashwood estate. The late afternoon sun had begun to soften, throwing long streaks of orange across the cobblestones, making the wedding venue glow like some storybook version of Southern charm. Chandeliers already sparkled through the tall windows, and I could hear a string quartet warming up. Everyone seemed to belong here but me. I stepped out, straightened the hem of my navy dress, and smoothed my palms against the fabric to quiet the small tremor in my hands. My sister Valora had chosen this place because it was timeless and elegant, words she liked to use in interviews. I'd been told my invitation was a courtesy. Still, I came. Maybe some part of me still believed family could surprise me, even now. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and polished wood. Waiters moved like clockwork, placing champagne flutes on silver trays. I could see the reception hall ahead, all cream-colored drapes and candlelight. My name wasn't on any of the seating boards at the entrance, so I went to the coordinator, a young man with a headset. "Hi," I said quietly. "I'm Abigail Carter. Where am I seated?" He scrolled through his tablet. Right here." He pointed toward a small table tucked near the corridor leading to the restrooms. "Table 11. I followed the line of his finger. In the far corner, beyond the main clusters of tables decorated with orchids and gold chargers, there sat a tiny round table with 2 chairs, practically against the wall. Guests streamed past it on their way to and from the restrooms. For a second, I thought it must be a mistake, but the name card was there, folded neatly. My name, or what they thought was my name. I sat down, pressing my knees together under the tablecloth, forcing my face into a neutral smile while people walked by, glancing at me as if I might offer them a towel. A middle-aged man in a tux even asked me, "Excuse me, is the bathroom this way?" I nodded and pointed silently. He didn't realize I was a guest. I swallowed the humiliation, but my mind was far from quiet. This wasn't random. This was placed. It was the same choreography that had played out my entire life, just now dressed in white linens and soft music. The forgotten daughter gets the bathroom table. I reached for my water glass to steady my hands. That's when I noticed the name card. It read, Mrs. Abigail Carter. Carter. My ex-husband's name. The divorce had been final for 4 years. I'd gone back to my birth name, Merrick. I had told my family, emailed them, sent cards. They knew. They chose not to care. A woman at the same table, someone I didn't recognize, smiled politely. "Oh," she said, nodding at the card. "So you're still married?" I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. "No, not anymore." Her brows lifted. Strange they didn't update it. "Strange," I echoed, my voice even but clipped. Inside, though, it felt like a match striking a very dry surface. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth while she turned back to her phone. All around, laughter floated like bubbles, the sound of silverware on china, glasses clinking. My sister was somewhere in the center of it all, a vision in lace, being adored. I sat near the restroom corridor like staff, my name rewritten, my existence half erased. As I sat there, the memories came uninvited. Thanksgiving dinners where my seat had been pushed to the end of the table, the way Valora's stories were always met with applause while mine drifted into the air unheard. The countless times my mother's eyes had slid past me to focus on my older siblings. Each incident small enough to excuse, but together a pattern impossible to ignore. I breathed in slowly, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies, and exhaled just as slowly. I wasn't going to cry. I had promised myself that before I came. If they wanted me silent, I would be silent, but I would not break. The woman next to me excused herself and left. Alone now, I traced my finger over the embossed lettering of the place card, Carter, as if to remind me that even my failures weren't my own, that they too belonged to someone else. Across the room, a projector hummed to life. Staff rolled down a large screen behind the main table. A slideshow of family photos was about to begin. Childhood memories, graduations, the life we had shared. I wondered how much of me would survive in their version. My stomach tightened. I had no appetite for the roast chicken being served. I wanted to leave but stayed rooted, my eyes fixed on the screen. Maybe I was still hoping for a sign, a picture, a moment where I hadn't been forgotten. The string quartet faded out, lights dimmed, and the chatter softened to a hush. The first image flickered onto the screen. Valora at age 5, holding a puppy in the backyard. Then Valora at 10, smiling on a swing. Then Valora at 16, homecoming queen. Slide after slide, my sister's life unfolded like a curated exhibit. Her dresses, her friends, her trips, and no sign of me. Not one. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails pressing into my palms, my face a mask of polite attention. No one around me noticed, or maybe they did and preferred not to. The next slide flickered. A family portrait, my parents, Valora, and our brother standing in front of the Ashwood estate. My space on the far right cropped out entirely. A low murmur rippled across the tables as some guests shifted uncomfortably. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding. Would they erase me completely tonight? Was that the plan? I forced my eyes to the projector beam, blinking back the sting. Whatever happened next, I needed to remember every detail. If they thought this would break me, they didn't know me as well as they believed. The screen flickered again, and the lights dimmed a little more. The music softened to a lullaby-like hum, and the lights dimmed just enough for faces to become shadows around me. The projector cast its glow across the hall, throwing up pictures of a family I barely recognized. My sister's laughter floated from the head table like a bell. People hushed, turning their bodies toward the screen. I sat still, holding my glass so tightly the condensation made my palms slick. Valora as a toddler in a gingham dress. Valora blowing out candles on a cake. Valora with my parents at Myrtle Beach. For a second, I told myself my face would appear soon, maybe in a corner of one of those group shots, a cameo of the daughter who actually had been there. But the images kept moving, each one more curated than the last. Vacations, graduations, my father's retirement party, all without me. Then one flicker of me, like an afterthought, at the edge of a school photo, my arm cropped at the shoulder. I almost laughed at how blatant it was. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd airbrushed me out. A couple seated at the next table murmured as the slides rolled. "Oh, she looks beautiful even as a kid," the woman said. "What a perfect family." Perfect. As long as I wasn't there. My stomach tightened. Memories began surfacing unbidden. The birthday when my cake came last, my mother's eyes darting to Valora's new dress instead of my report card, my father's silence when I asked him once why I always had to sit at the end of the table. All those small slices adding up to something I could no longer swallow. The projector whirred, and applause broke out for a montage of Valora's college achievements. Guests clinked glasses. I stayed seated, fingers wrapped around the stem of mine. A man slid into the empty chair next to me, setting down his whiskey. He was middle-aged, gray at the temples, probably one of the out-of-town cousins Valora liked to parade at events. He smiled at me with a hint of curiosity. "So," he said, leaning closer over the table noise, "are you a cousin from out of state? You don't look much like them." The question landed like a slap. My lips curved into a polite half-smile, the one I'd practiced since childhood. "No, I'm their daughter." His eyebrows shot up. "Really? I would never have guessed. They don't mention you much." "I know," I said softly, turning back to the screen. He cleared his throat. "Well, you must be proud. Your sister's done well." I nodded, but said nothing. Inside, something clenched tighter. This wasn't just about being left off a slideshow. This was about being recast as an outsider, a stranger at my own sister's wedding. Even guests believed it. Another slide. Valora in a white dress at her college graduation, my mother beaming beside her. I remembered that day. I'd been the one behind the camera, holding my mother's bag while she fixed Valora's sash. But in this version, it was as if I'd never existed. I lifted my glass, took a sip of champagne, and tasted nothing. My mind drifted to my father's expression at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Tight-lipped, eyes sliding past me as though I were a guest who'd wandered in. How many years had he been complicit in this rewriting? The man next to me excused himself, probably sensing my silence. Alone again, I studied the images as they rolled on. The more I saw, the more my inner voice sharpened. Why do I keep giving them the power to humiliate me? Why did I even come? I could hear my own breath under the music. In my mind, I was back at 12, standing on the porch after school with a ribbon in my hair, waiting for my mother to ask me about my day. She never did. She was inside, helping Valora pick out a dress for a dance. The slideshow reached a crescendo. Valora and my parents at a gala. Valora receiving an award. Valora with friends in Paris. It played like an advertisement for a perfect life. Not a single moment of mine included. A flash of anger flickered. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. I wasn't a girl anymore, powerless and waiting for someone to notice me. I was a grown woman sitting at the restroom table of my sister's wedding, watching strangers decide I didn't belong. Behind me, two women whispered, "Isn't that her cousin? She doesn't look like them at all." Yeah, I wonder who invited her. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. When I opened them, I caught my reflection in the water glass. A woman with a steady gaze, not the invisible child. My jaw tightened. They could crop me out of their photos, but I was still here, breathing, watching, remembering. The final slides faded to black, and the lights brightened slightly. Guests clapped. Valora stood, dabbing her eyes with a napkin, playing the role of the moved bride. My parents smiled at her, then at the crowd, never once glancing toward me. I set my glass down, my hand trembling slightly despite my effort to stay composed. Inside, the silent rage was building, but I wasn't going to explode here. Not yet. I wanted every detail etched into my memory. "If this is just the beginning," I whispered under my breath, "how much more do they have planned for me tonight?" I didn't have to wait long to find out. The warning came sooner than I expected. The reception hall buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the soft clinks of glassware. Waiters in slate-gray vests navigated between tables, refilling water and offering hors d'oeuvres. A chandelier overhead flickered with warm light across polished floors, and the walls draped in white linen. But despite all that festive glamour, I felt distant, like watching someone else's wedding through a pane of glass. I excused myself from my seat, excused by the very people who had placed me as far from the center as possible, and stepped into the dim corridor outside. The air was cooler there, away from the chatter and the clink of silver. I ran a hand through my hair, smoothing it back, trying to steady the thump in my chest. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Caller ID. "Leora, my stepmother." "Of course," I answered with a measured tone. "Yes?" Her voice came soft, polite, but contained an edge I knew too well. "Abigail, remember, today isn't about you. Don't do anything to draw attention. Let your sister shine." That "let your sister shine" stung more than any insult. As if I were a light that could interfere with hers, not a daughter entitled to a flicker of attention. "Of course," I replied. "That's exactly what I plan to do." She paused. "Good," she said quietly. "You don't want to ruin what's already perfect." Click. She hung up. I stayed in the corridor a moment longer, letting her words settle in my bones. They didn't scare me, but they served as confirmation. Everything was orchestrated. My placement at the restroom table, the cocktail of appreciation for Valora, the absence of my name, all part of a script I was only now beginning to read. I swallowed the rising anger and walked back in. Inside, the hall felt narrower, the laughter louder, the faces more judgmental. I sank back into my seat just as the servers began passing trays of canapés. The scent of smoked salmon and crisp cucumber passed over me. I lifted one piece, smoked salmon on a cracker, but didn't eat it. My appetite was swallowed by something else, the quiet boxing of thoughts in my mind. Across the gift table, packages stacked tall, silver boxes, wrapped linens, framed photographs. I had spent hours restoring a family album, scanning old photos, retouching edges, binding it in leather. I tucked the finished album into a gift box and wrapped it carefully, writing an inscription. To family, with memory. But here it sat, unopened, ignored, shoved to the side. As Valora stood to accept a gift from a well-known philanthropist, I saw her open it with flourish, thanking the guest with a radiant smile. Applause echoed. The room responded with oohs and ahs, but there, tucked behind a stack of more conspicuous parcels, my album remained unopened, invisible, my chest tightened. It wasn't just neglect, it was active dismissal. Memories surfaced. My entire life had been built in margins. Birthday cards, sent without greetings, presents opened in front of me but never acknowledged. Dinners where I passed dishes but never got enough to taste. Valora's successes turned into family victories. My contributions erased as though they never existed. And tonight, even my attempts to preserve memory were being ignored. A guest at my table leaned in. "Did you bring something special?" His tone was too casual. I recognized that approach, suspicion masquerading as courtesy. I nodded. "It's a photo album my mother left behind. Some of the earliest memories we had, before we became separate stories." He nodded politely, but turned to speak to another guest before I could say more. I sighed inwardly. "You see me, but only when convenient." I slipped my fingers to the edge of the table and traced an invisible line across the pressed linen. The soft hum of the string quartet restarted, the lights shifting again. The room exhaled. A new slideshow began, this one of wedding portraits, honeymoon previews, networks of adoring friends, Valora at her table, smiling, Valora in her wedding dress haloed by window light, the ceremony dancers, the first kiss, and one more photo, my sister and I together at a younger age. But she was centered. I was cropped along the extreme right margin. My face half out of frame, a ghost at the edges. I watched that snippet, feeling a quiet fury. If everything about me could be reduced to a remote corner of a frame, then I would make the margins speak. I lowered my champagne glass, setting it carefully so it wouldn't clink. My hand trembled slightly, but I forced it smooth. I leaned forward, pressing my knuckles flat against the tabletop so I could ground myself in something solid. The people around me clapped at the end of the montage. Toasts began, voices rose, but I felt a weight lift, just a little. I'd been given that moment, to witness my erasure and name it. Born into silence, but still breathing. I leaned back and looked across the room at Valora, radiant and oblivious. I wanted to stand, speak, demand acknowledgement. But I held myself. Not because I wasn't angry, but because anger without control is a fire that can burn one's own hands. So I sat there, silent but burning, and I whispered under my breath, "If they think I'll stay silent forever, they're mistaken." And the first test of that promise came when Valora stole even the work of my own hands. The hall had shifted into the speeches section now, a slow swirl of candlelight, clinking silver, and the low murmur of guests getting comfortable after dinner. From the corner where I sat, I could see the head table glowing under the chandeliers. Valora and her groom were radiant, the picture of a perfect couple. I steadied my breathing, folding my napkin over my lap and forcing myself to sit tall. If I was going to be ignored, at least I would not look defeated. A server refilled my water without asking. I caught the reflection of my own face in the glass, composed, but with eyes that had learned how to absorb blows in silence. Across the room, the microphone squealed lightly as Valora rose for her speech. She adjusted the mic with the same practiced ease she used for magazine interviews. Guests straightened in their chairs, forks pausing over plates. "I want to thank my parents," she began, her voice bright and sure, "for their unwavering support and for teaching me what love looks like." Applause swelled. I want to thank my bridesmaids, my friends from college, our wonderful event planner, and everyone who made this day possible." Her eyes scanned the room like a performer checking her mark. "Truly, we couldn't have done this without you." I held my breath. This was the moment. Maybe she'd at least mention the sister who had hemmed her dress, who had spent weekends sorting photos for her montage, who had tried to show up despite everything. But her gaze skipped over me like I wasn't even there. She lowered the microphone and smiled at her groom. No mention, no acknowledgement. It was as if I had never lifted a finger, as if decades of loyalty and late nights meant nothing at all. The guests clapped. Some rose for a standing ovation. I stayed seated, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the sting of something far older than this night. The master of ceremonies called for a toast. Valora and her groom raised their glasses. I lifted mine mechanically, my eyes fixed on her, willing her to glance my way. She never did. The toast ended, and laughter rippled through the hall again, swallowing my silence. Then a woman approached the head table, a tall guest in a jeweled shawl, running her hand over Valora's gown with admiration. "This dress," she exclaimed, "it's breathtaking. Was it custom-made?" Valora's smile widened. "Yes, it was flown in from Paris, handcrafted by a designer friend." She twirled slightly to show the back. Guests murmured, impressed. I blinked once, slowly. The fabric I had stitched myself under a lamp late at night, the repairs I'd made to the delicate lace, the hidden gusset I'd added so it would fit her better. All of it dismissed with a single lie. Paris. Handcrafted. As though my hands had never touched it. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to keep from speaking. I could feel the words forming in my throat. Tell them it was you. But I swallowed them. Not yet. I thought of all the other times she had claimed my work, the science fair project in high school, the speech she delivered at college that I had helped her write, the countless times she had smiled at me later and said, "You're so good at staying in the background. I couldn't do what I do without you." I used to think it was a compliment. Tonight it sounded like a confession. My fork lay untouched on my plate. The roasted chicken had gone cold. I sipped my water instead, letting the coolness run down my throat. Around me, conversation swelled again, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional clatter of dropped cutlery. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. They mistake my silence for weakness. They think I'll never expose them. Valora sat back down, basking in the glow of attention. She leaned to her groom and whispered something that made him chuckle. My father poured more wine into her glass. My stepmother clapped daintily. I shifted my gaze downward, focusing on the movement at the edge of the room. A man in work clothes, clearly not a guest, was slipping quietly through the side door near the service hall. He carried a dusty wooden box about the size of a footlocker, its corners bound with tarnished brass. For a heartbeat, the candlelight caught on its surface, and a flicker of recognition shot through me. That box! Why did it look so familiar? I remembered being a child in our old basement, seeing a similar box shoved under a sheet, forbidden to touch it. My father's voice stern, "That's not for you." It had been one of those household mysteries that lingered but never explained. My heart skipped once, then again. I set down my glass, my fingers suddenly cold against the tablecloth. Without taking my eyes off the man, I reached for my clutch. My chair scraped softly as I stood. No one noticed. Why would they? He disappeared into the back hallway, the door swinging closed behind him. I hesitated only a second before following. I followed Galen into the shadows, and that's when I saw what they had tried to bury forever. The soft echo of music drifted behind me from the ballroom, a distant lullaby that contrasted sharply with the pounding in my ears. I slipped through a service doorway, careful to keep to the dark corners where staff moved crates and folded linens. The air smelled of damp tile and dust, more real than the perfume and gunmetal suits inside. Galen stood in front of a low cabinet pushed against the stone wall. He pressed a flashlight beam across its surface, illuminating scratches and initials faintly carved into the wood. Behind him, I recognized the same planked floor as our old house basement. My pulse quickened. "This belongs to your family," Galen said, voice low. He used his tool to lever open a small latch. The box creaked open. I stepped forward, careful not to make a sound. Inside sat brittle papers wrapped in yellowed ribbon, a faded sepia photograph, and a worn leather-bound journal, the kind of thing someone would want to hide. I swallowed hard and reached in. My fingers brushed the leather. The name etched lightly on the lid caught the dim light. Abigail. My name. My heart stuttered. My body went cold. I knelt beside Galen and untied the ribbon. The photo was of a young woman, my mother, Anna, holding a tiny baby in a hospital blanket. I recognized the nursing cap, the shape of her fingers. That was me. I touched the edge of the journal and felt the texture of its cover, soft, worn, urgent. I unwrapped it carefully. Pages cracked. Scrawl unfolded. Medical paperwork, family lies, names crossed out, pages folded. Then finally, the last entry. To my Abigail, if you ever read this, know that you were always mine, even if they tried to take you away. My vision blurred. The world tilted. That line, it was a door opening after years of silence. My mother's voice from beyond, reaching to me. Tears welled in my eyes. I pressed the journal to my chest, the photograph falling against my wrist. Everything inside me split. Grief, anger, grief again. They didn't just forget me, they sabotaged me. And now here was proof. Galen's flashlight wavered. I steadied it for him so I could continue reading. Legal documents, adoption papers, financial statements, evidence of a history I didn't know until that moment. That box wasn't random. It was deliberate. I remembered being locked out of that very basement as a child, hearing muffled voices, footsteps above me. They said, "She's too young. She won't understand." They never let me see. My mother begged them to leave me just a name, a record, something, but they buried everything. I sat back as Galen closed the box and wiped his brow. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I had to bring it." And in the hallway behind us, footsteps echoed. A shadow detached itself from the doorway. My father, Orpheus, emerged, tall, his expression tight. He froze when he saw the box open on the floor. "You shouldn't have found that," he said, flat and cold. My throat jumped, but I didn't back away. I closed the journal gently and stood. "Much of my life," I said, voice low but certain, "has been built on what you left me to discover alone." He swallowed. For a fraction of a second, I caught something behind his eyes, recognition and the weight of regret. Then he turned and walked away, leaving us in the dim hallway. I tucked the journal under my arm and returned slowly into the ballroom. Dinner had ended. And the floor glittered under crystal lights. Guests milled about in small groups, drinks in hand. No one looked at me. No one saw me. I held my head high. I carried the box in my mind now, a weapon and a promise. I would not be danced around or ignored any longer. The moment his words fell between us, I knew. My father had always known. And worse, he had chosen silence. The hallway seemed to fold in on itself, its shadows pressing closer around us. The muffled hum of violins and chatter from the ballroom seeped faintly through the double doors at the end of the corridor, distant, unreal, like echoes from another lifetime. I clutched the box tighter against my chest. Its wooden edges cut into my palms, grounding me in the moment even as everything else threatened to tilt. For a heartbeat, I thought he might move toward me, perhaps to take the box, perhaps to put a hand on my shoulder, perhaps to finally say the words I had starved for. But Orpheus only stared. His face was more drawn than I remembered, deep lines carved into the skin around his eyes and mouth. His stare was heavy, deliberate, like a verdict being handed down without a jury. "Don't stir the past," he said finally. His voice was steady, but I caught the fatigue behind it, the cracks he was trying to hide. "Nothing good will come of it. Put it back." Put it back. After decades of silence, of absence, of being erased, this was all he had to offer me? Not a confession, not an apology, not even an acknowledgement, just an order, as though I were still the obedient child he expected me to be. I blinked at him, stunned, but beneath my ribs something hardened. His eyes carried no warmth, no trace of paternal love, only resignation, only the weary authority of a man who had grown used to controlling the story. And now I recognized the other thing hidden there: fear. My voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut the space between us. I'm not a child anymore. You can't keep telling me what to see or what to hide. He flinched. A flicker, barely perceptible, but I caught it. The first crack in his armor. Slowly, I lowered my gaze to the box, to the envelope I hadn't noticed at first, tucked beneath the diary. It was thicker than the other papers, the color of old cream, edges still sharp despite its age. My fingers trembled as I slid it free, unfolding it with care. The paper crackled faintly in the silence. It was a will, my mother's will, dated 15 years ago. Her handwriting leapt off the page, her name, her signature. My eyes darted over the lines, my pulse quickening with every phrase I uncovered. Equal share. To my daughter Abigail. Family home. The words blurred for a moment as my stomach twisted. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't oversight. This was theft. I looked up at him, my voice louder now, rising with each syllable. You knew. You knew this existed. You hid it. His mouth tightened, his jaw clenching. Some truths do more harm than good, he muttered, almost too soft to hear. I stared at him as if he had turned into a stranger. That was his excuse. That was the justification for decades of lies, of omissions, of making me invisible in every room we shared. My silence had been his cover. My absence, his protection. Images flooded my mind. My childhood birthdays where Valora twirled in new satin dresses while I unwrapped hand-me-down sweaters. Christmas mornings when I rose early to set the table, only for Valora to be praised for the decorations I had hung. The family dinners where I listened quietly in the corner, every achievement I whispered dismissed, while hers were paraded like trophies. And now, in my hands, the proof. The will that had been denied me, the inheritance, the recognition, the equal standing that had been rightfully mine, all buried under their silence. I folded the document carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it inside my jacket pocket. The fabric pressed it against my chest, each breath making me more aware of its weight. My body shook, but my voice did not. It's not just emotional anymore, I said, steady and deliberate. It's legal. His eyes flicked to the pocket, then back to my face. He stepped forward, as if he might still reclaim the paper, but I lifted my hand, palm out, halting him. The gesture surprised even me. It was the same way you might stop a stranger, a trespasser. You've had decades to do the right thing, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried, now it's my turn. He froze. His shoulders sagged, as though the strength had drained from him all at once. For a fleeting second, I saw something soften in his eyes, remorse maybe, or the hollow ache of defeat. But then it was gone, replaced by blankness, the practiced emptiness of a man retreating from consequence. This will tear the family apart, he said finally. I almost laughed, the sound sharp, bitter. You already did that. The silence between us deepened, colder than the air itself. The hallway seemed to stretch longer, darker. I felt years of ignored calls, dismissed efforts, overwritten memories pressing against me. My whole life, they had trained me to believe that silence meant weakness. But tonight, silence was no longer theirs to command. I shifted my weight, angling myself toward the ballroom door. My words came out softer this time, but sharper. If you won't speak the truth, I whispered, then I will. He said nothing. His gaze dropped, his shoulders slumping as if I were already lost to him. Or maybe he knew he was the one already lost. I turned and began to walk. My heels clicked softly on the tile, each step echoing. The double doors loomed closer, glowing faintly with the warm light spilling out from the ballroom. As I pushed them open, laughter and clinking glasses rushed out, wrapping around me like a false embrace. The light dazzled my eyes. Guests mingled in bright clusters, champagne flutes catching sparks from chandeliers. Valora stood at the center of it all, glowing, radiant, surrounded by admirers. She didn't see me. Not yet. I adjusted my jacket slightly, ensuring the envelope was hidden but secure. The weight of the will pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. As I moved deeper into the room, weaving between tables and clusters of polished conversation, someone turned toward me. A man I didn't recognize at first, his face weathered but sharp, his eyes keen. His gaze flicked down briefly to my pocket, then back to meet my eyes. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then spoke. The first witness of the truth had found me. The moment I stepped back into the ballroom, the air felt different. The music had resumed, violins weaving around a steady piano line, and conversations rose again, but none of it sounded the same. It was all brighter, louder, more artificial, as though the room itself was trying too hard to smooth over the fracture I had left behind. The chandeliers glowed above me, casting their little suns across polished marble and glittering glasses. I walked slowly, deliberately, through the clusters of guests, my jacket pulled tight across my body. Beneath the fabric, the envelope pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat. I was the storm inside their calm. From the corner of the dance floor, I saw her moving toward me. Celine. Smaller than I remembered. Her posture bent with age, shoulders slightly stooped, silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears, but her eyes, sharp, alert, bright even in the low light, had not dimmed. She cut through the crowd with quiet purpose. When she reached me, she stopped just close enough that only I could hear. "I knew your mother," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but it held something unshakable, something earned. "They never wanted me to tell you, but I saw how they kept her from you." The words pierced straight through the noise. My throat tightened, a knot forming deep in my chest. I managed a nod, my eyes fixed on hers, absorbing the weight she had just handed me. Suddenly, the truth wasn't only brittle parchment tucked in a box or fading ink on letters. It wasn't just suspicion or broken memory. It had a witness, a voice, a living presence. But before I could respond, the chandeliers dimmed. A hush rolled through the crowd like a tide receding. Heads turned toward the large screen at the front of the room. The hum of chatter softened to near silence. The video began. Soft piano music swelled. On the screen appeared a montage, the wedding planner's polished creation, a highlight reel of Valora's life, childhood clips with the edges blurred to nostalgia, a close-up of her at age 7, hair in ribbons, running across a garden lawn, applause at her high school graduation, slow-motion confetti at her engagement party, every image bathed in golden light, each one calculated to stir tears, to create a narrative of perfection, and then, a blank space, where my toast should have been. I had spoken earlier that evening. I had stood at the microphone, congratulated her, offered gratitude to the family and blessings for her future. But in this curated montage, I was nowhere. The video skipped past it entirely, as though I had never been there. My words evaporated, my presence erased. The images rolled on. Valora walking under magnolia trees at her college campus, Valora at 16 holding up her first award, Valora's birthday parties with carefully staged smiles. Always her in the center frame. My chest tightened. My heart thudded like it wanted to break free. I sat frozen in my chair, my pulse roaring in my ears. They weren't just erasing me from the past, they were erasing me in real time. The crowd chuckled at a lighter clip, Valora at a costume party, tripping playfully in oversized heels. The sound of their laughter felt cruel, though they didn't even know why. Beside me, Celine reached quietly into the box I still carried. She withdrew a single photograph, my mother holding me as a baby, her face radiant, tired but proud. She placed it gently on the ledge next to me, her hand brushing mine in silent solidarity. I stared at the photo. Fear and anxiety swirled hot in my blood, but beneath them, something else flickered. Resolve. A man at my table, someone I barely remembered, leaned back in his chair. "Did you say something earlier?" he asked, almost amused. "Must have cut that part out." He smiled faintly, as though he had made some clever observation. I forced a polite nod, though my voice was steady steel. Something must have gone wrong. The video ended. The crowd erupted in applause, rising to their feet. Valora stood at the front, radiant as ever, her hands clasped to her chest as though humbled by the adoration. Tears glistened in her eyes on cue, and she bowed her head just slightly, a picture of grace and gratitude. The room was hers, at least that's what she believed. I sat still, my hands gripping the box, the envelope heavy at my side. My jaw clenched so tight I felt the ache in my temples. Anger nudged at the corners of my eyes, hot tears threatening, but contained. This injustice, I would not absorb it anymore. Not tonight. I rose to my feet. The motion was simple, but it carried through the room like a crack in glass. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned. Whispers rose in a growing tide. I stepped forward, box in hand, my posture firm, my voice rising, not loud, but clear enough to slice through the swell of chatter. If they want silence, I said, my tone unwavering, I will give them the opposite. The words carried across the room like a thrown stone hitting water. Valora's face shifted instantly, shock first, then confusion. The orchestra musicians, caught mid-note, faltered and paused. Glasses clinked nervously against plates. The air thickened, waiting. I stood taller, the weight of the envelope pressing against me, the photograph Celine had placed at my side glinting faintly in the dim light. My chest trembled with adrenaline, but my voice was steady. I looked out across the faces, across decades of erasure and dismissal, and let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I met Valora's gaze, and for the first time in years, I did not look away. I would not vanish quietly anymore. The moment my hand released the box onto the gift table, the entire room shifted. The ballroom, once a swirl of laughter, glasses clinking, and chatter layered over the hum of violins, seemed to exhale and fall still. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. It was as if the chandeliers themselves had brightened, their crystal arms focusing all their glare on me, pulling me into the center of a stage I had never asked for, but had long prepared to stand upon. My pulse thudded at my ribs, loud enough I thought someone nearby might hear it. Still, I kept my steps measured, steady, the heels of my shoes striking against the polished floor like punctuation marks. I had lived too long in the margins. Tonight I walked into the middle of the page. Valora sat at the head table, framed in gold light like a portrait come alive. She looked untouchable. Radiant dress, flawless posture, the kind of composed smile she had worn so many times before when she charmed investors, friends, even strangers into orbit around her. To the casual eye, nothing had changed. But I watched closely. I saw it, a tightening of her shoulders, a pause in the way her hand gripped her wineglass. She felt it too, the shift in air, the gaze of 100 pairs of eyes beginning to turn away from her glow and toward me. I didn't rush. I placed the box carefully at the center of the gift display, straightening it so every angle caught the light. Then I stepped back, leaving it there, visible, undeniable. The ripple began softly, gasps near the front tables, whispers spreading like sparks through dry grass. Faces leaned toward each other. The quiet rustle of silk and linen filled the void where moments earlier there had been carefree laughter. I lifted my chin and found Valora's eyes across the room. No shame, no apology, just truth. "You can keep the house," I said, my voice calm, steady. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The hush in the room carried my words further than volume ever could. "But you'll have to keep the truth that comes with it." It struck like a bell tolling in a chapel. My words hung in the air, reverberating long after they were spoken. Valora's smile flickered, then fractured. She tried to mask it, tilting her head as though someone had told a small joke, letting out a brittle laugh, but the sound didn't carry. The room had already turned. The box glinted under the chandelier's light, and though no one yet knew its contents in full, everyone understood it held weight, a will, a journal, evidence of years she had curated out of existence. I held up one hand, quieting the low hum of whispers before they could overtake me. "I have copies," I continued, my voice smooth but edged with steel. "My mother's diary, the will she wrote, They're safe. Already with my attorney. Already with the press. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the way even the waiter froze mid-step with a tray of champagne flutes trembling slightly in his hand. Valora's lips moved. "You can't be serious," she whispered, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. I smiled, not smug, not triumphant, just certain. "Then you won't mind when the papers arrive tomorrow morning." The laughter that had filled the night just minutes earlier died completely. Guests sat stiff, expressions shifting, confusion, curiosity, discomfort. Some whispered behind their hands. Others stared openly, phones already sliding out to record, flashes beginning to spark discreetly from the corners of the room. Valora's world, so carefully polished, so flawlessly staged, was beginning to crack in real time. Her face reddened, fury rising to fill the silence she could not control. She stood abruptly, the scrape of her chair cutting through the room like a blade. "You're lying," she spat, the confidence that had carried her for years slipping, fear edging her tone. "You have no right." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. "I have every right," I answered, my voice calm but louder now, carrying to the farthest tables. "You erased me for decades. Tonight, I claimed myself back." Her words died in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The crowd's eyes bounced between us, judgment forming silently in the spaces her power could not reach. Guests shifted uneasily, caught between disbelief and dawning recognition. An older woman touched her husband's sleeve and whispered. A younger cousin stared at me wide-eyed, his fork forgotten. I could almost hear the silent verdict forming in the collective mind of the room. Something had been hidden, and I had dragged it into the light. I turned slowly, deliberately, leaving the box squarely in the center of the display, where no aide, no cousin, no loyal friend could whisk it away unnoticed. I stepped back into the crowd, feeling its press and its parting, as though I carried both danger and deliverance. Valora's glare burned into me, equal parts hatred and betrayal. To her, I had broken a pact, one I never agreed to in the first place, to stay silent, to stay small, to let her version of the story reign. But my silence had become weighty. Tonight it was a weapon. The family's aides moved swiftly, whispering to one another, eyes darting toward the table where the box sat like an accusation no one dared to touch. Security hovered at the edges, unsure if they were witnessing a scandal or a spectacle. I didn't raise my voice again. I didn't need to. My whisper to myself carried all the promise of what came next. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of their reckoning. And as I moved deeper into the crowd, heads turning to follow me, I felt it. The strange, heavy lightness of finally being seen. Not a ghost, not an afterthought, but undeniable. And the reckoning came swiftly, in ways even I couldn't have scripted. Dawn's pale light crept through the curtains of my hotel suite as I lay awake, the paper trail already whispering across Charleston, social circles ablaze, legal talk swirling, whispers following my name. I slipped out early, dressed in quiet navy, and drove slowly into town. The streets were still, the humidity clinging, as though the city waited for justice to settle. I parked in a side lane, walked past familiar facades, the old bookstore, the row of magnolia trunks swaying in the breeze, the wrought iron balconies hanging with Spanish moss. The world seemed both unchanged and tremulous under the weight of possibilities. I arrived at the courthouse just as its columns caught the morning light. Reporters milled at the steps, cameras at the ready. Inside, the courtroom hummed with quiet energy. I slipped in unnoticed and took a seat behind my attorney. Valora arrived, gliding in with her usual calm demeanor, flanked by counsel and relatives who looked as though they had rehearsed distress. Father, Orpheus, sat behind her, his face pale, arms folded. Mother, Lyora, remained at the back, eyes averted. When the judge called the docket, hush settled like a blanket. My attorney presented the will, the diary, the box of documents. He offered evidence of years of concealment and proof that the original estate plan included me. Valora's lawyers objected, accusing tampering. My attorney quietly produced a chain of custody report, Galen's find, the undisturbed box, sealed signatures, and original notary marks. I watched as the judge leafed through the pages, eyes flicking over signatures, heart banged in my chest. At a break, Valora glared at me through the barrier. She mouthed something I couldn't hear. I met her gaze without flinching. When court resumed, the judge rendered a ruling. The hidden will was validated. The estate's title froze. Valora lost her exclusive rights and was required to return ownership to a shared structure, my name included. The crowd stirred, gasps and camera flashes. Valora's hand trembled. Orpheus looked down at his papers, face sagging. Lyora stepped forward, angry, disbelieving, but stayed silent when ordered to. I felt more than relief. It was vindication, emotional, legal, moral. In that moment, years of erasure reversed in a binding stroke of justice. Weeks passed. Without effort on my part, society turned. Invitations ceased. Professional contacts, clients, boards, events, quietly withdrew. Valora, once the darling of Charleston's elite, became a figure whispered about. Her social calendar dried up. Her phone stopped ringing. Her sponsors pulled back. Her Instagram posts received no praise. It was a silent canceling, not with shouts, but with absence. The world she built on my shadow crumbled. Yet I did not gloat. I watched with steady heart as symbols of her perfection faded. The house she once believed she owned became a matter of court liens and disputed deeds. Legal notices replaced holiday greeting cards. Notice pages in the local paper detailed the reversal. One bright morning, I unlocked the door to my new shop. For her, nothing forgotten. It smelled of wood polish, linen, and soft sunlight. The frontage was modest, a restored storefront on a quiet lane, engraved simply. Inside, glass cases held restored photographs, journals, old letters. The original diary from my mother lay in a glass display at the center, open to her final entry. Beside it, a placard. To Abigail, from beyond. A local reporter came by that morning, welcomed by my attorney. A small article printed the next day. Even the society page carried a photo of me standing in front of the shop, face calm, eyes steady. Comments came in. Beautiful gesture. Important mission. A reminder none of us should be invisible. Valora's name appeared in the same column, but dwarfed by mine. She faded into the background of her own story. I spent that first day arranging keepsakes, greeting visitors who brought old family photos or letters. An elderly woman handed in a box of letters her mother never showed her. A man brought in a dilapidated frame that turned out to be a forgotten portrait of a cousin. I listened, repaired, preserved. I offered them dignity in what others discarded. That night, I sat by the window, the paperback open on my lap, the city lights reflecting softly. My scars were still there, loneliness, betrayal, the ache of years spent unseen. But now, they weren't chains. They were maps of survival. I thought of forgiveness, not as forgetting or condoning, but as freeing. I saw how I did not have to erase them in return, but I could step forward in my truth. My heart quietly whispered that forgiveness was a gift to me more than to them. In that soft darkness, I said aloud, to no one but myself, I once thought I knew my folks, but in the end, I learned I only needed to know myself, and that was enough. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones buried closest to home. This story isn't just about inheritance or betrayal. It's about the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your place, your voice, and your worth. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? What would you do if the truth was hidden right beneath your feet? If this story moved you or made you think about your own family in a different light, don't forget to hit subscribe. More powerful, real-life inspired stories are coming your way.